20th century, it was all about, there were myths, right, underlying everything. The myth of away, that place you could send your waste. The myth that ultimately that we weren't taking any account of the repercussions, the non-financial repercussions of our activities, the externalities. And what we in the early days of organic were all about was internalizing those externalities, was taking stock of them and saying, look, if we're going to be in commerce, we need to be accountable to our planet, to other forms of life, to future generations, that we need to measure and reduce and be accountable for our water footprint, our climate footprint, our social footprints, and so forth.
Welcome to the Real Organic Podcast. I'm Lindley Dixon, co-director of the Real Organic Project. We're a grassroots, farmer-led movement with an add-on organic food label to distinguish organic crops grown in healthy soils and organic livestock raised on well-managed pasture. You just heard from Gary Hirshberg, a well-known entrepreneur and former CEO of Stonyfield Yogurt. A shorter version of this interview premiered live on our YouTube channel during last winter's symposium and is still available to watch. There you can click Show Chat Replay in the top right corner to see the comments and questions that viewers posted in real time.
Welcome to the Real Organic Project podcast. And my guest today is Gary Hirshberg. Gary has a pretty amazing story of starting as a partner with Samuel Kamen many years ago, milking one cow, I believe, in the very beginning, and making yogurt to fund their nonprofit, which seems like a crazy idea, Gary. That's how you're going to make money. And of course, that one cow evolved into Stonyfield Yogurt, which has become a very big enterprise. So I'm looking forward to the conversation. This will be interesting. Welcome.
Thank you. And to clarify, it was Samuel who was doing the milking. Samuel's really the creator of Stonyfield. I joined him. I was on the board of the little nonprofit and rural education center that Samuel started, and I joined him a few months after we launched Stonyfield. So he was the lonely farmer, and I'm not sure any of us were thinking too much about revenue at the time.
Yeah. I met Samuel back in the early days of NOFA. He was a founder and a major organizer, a ball of energy in the development of the organic movement in the Northeast.
Yeah, those early NOFA conferences, Samuel even woke us up in the morning. He was the alarm clock. He would go around clanging his cowbell. Legendary energy, really. And partnering with him generally meant tying on and hanging on for dear life. So.
Yeah. So, I'd like to talk about, we're here to talk about milk and money and talk about the challenges that face the organic dairy world now, the organic dairy farms. Talk about the gap between what we want organic to be and what sometimes it has become. Before we do, could you just give a little bit of context for Stonyfield from that beginning?
Sure.
And there's an excellent interview with you that Guy Ross did on how I built this, and I recommend it to people who are interested. It's very, very entertaining and informative. But so just a quick few minutes through the evolution.
Sure. Well, at first, thanks for having me. As you know, I haven't been the most enthusiastic champion of the Real Organic Project, but I know that we have the same end goal, so I'm delighted to be chatting with you and your folks. So my organic journey really began growing up in southern New Hampshire. Most of the we knew where most of our holiday hams and turkeys came from. We knew the farmers, and one by one they slowly disappeared during my adolescence. And ultimately in college I studied climate change, which was even then, back in the 70s, a pretty known and clear science. That work led me into organic and led me to a little place called the New Alchemy Institute on Cape Cod, which, as you know, was advancing integrated to ecological strategies that integrated an understanding about carbon and other footprints, the need to decrease our input footprints, and also on the other end, creating highly productive ecological food systems with aquaculture and hydroponics and agriculture, all with the absence of chemicals and chemical fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides. So I really kind of cut my teeth there in the early 70s. And as you point out, this was a time of advancing the science, asking really challenging questions. Can we be highly productive without all these inputs? And we proved unequivocally, scientifically, with National Science Foundation backing and peer-reviewed papers that we could be highly productive. In fact, our bioshelter agriculture, the indoor organic ag systems that we're producing with fish and vegetables and, again, organic hydroponic systems and so forth, were among then the highest, most productive ecological food systems in the world in terms of per square meter and per acre. But what we weren't proving was the economics. We were proving the science. And so that became very evident when Ronald Reagan became president in 1981. And in his literally first days in office, he slashed all funding. He got rid of the Community Services Administration, which was funding a variety of community garden programs and efforts to educate about these technologies all over. I was chairing one of those. He slashed all renewable energy funding at the Department of Energy, all organic funding at USDA. And suddenly we, in the sort of progressive ag and sustainable systems world, found ourselves without any basis of federal support. And that also meant that the competition for private support, which we were a 501c3 nonprofit, also dried up because the nonprofits had to put real safety nets in place for the millions of real needs out there of people who were food, nutrition, and clean water challenged. And so we became kind of the discretionary funding, and money got a lot tougher. It was about that time that Samuel Kamen, who, as you say, I had known from the early NOFA days, and big fan of his. Samuel and the Rural Education Center, his little organic farming school, invited me to join his board to help figure out what we were trying to figure out at New Alchemy, which is how to create self-funded mechanisms that could replace the funding that had been driving all of our research. And at New Alchemy, we were doing consulting, and we were selling greenhouse kits and doing things that would generate revenue. Samuel had a much smaller little nonprofit and much fewer options. But Samuel had something that we didn't have. He had this genius for fermented foods in particular. In fact, he was making beer, he was making kimchi, he was making sauerkraut, and he was making this delicious yogurt from his one cow. And during one of many board meetings, as we were wringing our hands trying to figure out how do we rescue this little nonprofit, how do we keep the work going, because we knew we were on the right track scientifically. Somebody, and to this day, I'm not sure who gets the credit, but somebody said, why don't you start selling this stuff? Because we were sitting there eating Samuel and Louise's delicious ambrosia-like plain yogurt with his maple syrup at our board meeting. Anyhow, that became the inspiration for Stonyfield. He borrowed $35,000 from the Sisters of Mercy, a group of Catholic nuns. You can hear all of this in the How I Built This podcast. But the point is that soon it became evident that this was a really important question that he and we were asking, which is, can we make this a commercially viable, can we get organic into the mainstream? There were no national organic standards at that time. As you know, organic was whatever the local certifier said.
Okay, so, and what did organic mean to you then?
Well, for me, it was a sort of a, I would say, simplistic definition. It was the absence of pesticides, herbicides, and chemical fertilizers. It was the absence of antibiotics in animal feed. It was a kind of a sacred vow to just swear off a lot of these sort of 20th century shortcuts. But I've grown and developed since then, and what I would say, it wasn't enough. There wasn't enough focus on, for example, the climate benefits, the metrics needed to really track the progress of organics, the nitrogen flows on farms, and particularly the nitrogen wastage and leakage and emissions from farms. And so over my decades since then, my own definition has evolved, and of course the organic standards, which had been first put forward in 1990, or first bundled by Kathleen Merrigan and company, ultimately after another 12 years in the early 2000s, finally came to bear in terms of regulations. But for me, it's always been a continuous improvement process. The standards are standards. They're never done. They're never finished. And this is where you and I do agree, is that the standards must continue to evolve. For us, though, it was what NOFA, in particular NOFA Vermont, which was our certifier, said it was. It was, again, the absence of negatives as opposed to more of the kind of metrics around the positives.
I think there's a challenge with standards because you're almost writing something for a lawyer, because lawyers
it's a defensive action.
Will challenge it. But before there were standards, there was a movement, and the movement was not just based on the absence of it, was based on very much positive beliefs. I know that Samuel had those positive beliefs.
Yeah.
He was one of the great teachers, right?
Yeah, we all did. No, I mean, if we could have captured what we all believed in those early days of New Alchemy and Stonyfield and the Rural Education Center, I would say the standards would be very close to what Bob Rodale ultimately called regenerative organic. Bob was a dear friend of mine, one of the early funders of New Alchemy, and I walked in the fields in Emmaus with him with the incredible side-by-side corn trials that started. And Bob explained this word, regenerative, and he said, look, organic falls short of what we ultimately need to aspire to. It doesn't measure in worker health, farmer health, animal health. It doesn't, although it has subsequently integrated animal health standards, but it doesn't measure in economic equity, fairness, diversity, and so on and so forth. And I can just take this moment in this interview just to say right away that what Bob intended for the use of the word regenerative is not what is happening in the marketplace right now. We have a great threat to organic, which is that many of these large companies see it as a workaround. It's a word, they're taking advantage of the fact that there is no definition. I mean, you can take issue with organic standards, but at least there's a legal definition, and at least there's penalties and fines, and even in some cases jail time associated with breaking, with not following the standards. But the word regenerative is there's as many different definitions as there are users. But what Bob intended was a kind of an organic plus, and I agree with that. The regenerative organic standard, a kind of a reach up, is something I heartily embrace. But in those days, we were just setting out, and as you say, the standards. I feel, I talk to the Joe Smileys of the world, the people who are in there early, really slaving to define standards that, as you say, would hold up to the test of law and regulation and certification. And by definition, it was narrower than I think we all would have idealized.
I agree with that, but I also think that actually the standards were pretty good.
They were pretty good.
I just think they haven't been enforced, but I do think they were pretty good. And
enforcement,
amazingly good. Congratulations to Kathleen.
That's right.
And the people who put those together.
That's right. No, it was an awesome start. And I too, remember I was also very associated with, the Soil Association in the UK and other parts of the world, Patrick, and, all of us were collaborating and having discussions. The start of iFoam began in those days. And what we were needing was something that everyone could agree on as a baseline. That I don't think any of us who took part, any of us who funded, any of us who did the hard work, were ever saying this is done now.
Yeah.
But I'm just merely pointing out that I think that the ambitions of NOFA, the Rural Education Center, New Alchemy, and ultimately Stonyfield were to integrate, were to create a standard, a definition that would enable consumers and all of us to make a conscious choice to invest in a different approach than had been the predominant, paradigm of the 20th century. In the 20th century, it was all about, there were myths, right, underlying everything. The myth of away, that place you could send your waste. The myth that ultimately that we weren't taking any account of the repercussions, the non-financial repercussions of our activities, the externalities. And what we in the early days of organic were all about was internalizing those externalities, was taking stock of them and saying, look, if we're going to be in commerce, we need to be accountable to our planet, to other forms of life, to future generations, that we need to measure and reduce and be accountable for our water footprint, our climate footprint, our social footprints, and so forth. But to your point, and getting back to the story, when we began, we were not just organic, we were actually biodynamic. Samuel we built our herd up to about 19 cows, and they were on an herb treatment and so on and so forth. But what happened for us was something that happened to many of our colleagues as we tried to make the transition from nonprofit advocacy to actual commerce and sort of pay the bills. We outgrew quickly our 19 cows at the farm. The magic night is captured in that podcast. It was the night the power went out when we had finished milking one cow and we had to milk the other 18 by hand. And the next morning, Samuel, and then start making yogurt and running our business and me collecting investment. And we realized we couldn't do both. We look at people like Jack and Ann Laser at Butterworks who farmed and processed with utter astonishment. Jack, who unfortunately, of course, has left us, but Jack heard me say 1,000 times that I just worship him because he did things we couldn't do. But we were setting out to educate, we were setting out to inspire. We wanted consumers to realize that they could get superior quality and still be responsible for reducing externalities. And so we needed to find other farms, and we could not find any farms willing to do all the crazy stuff we were doing with the herbs. The thought of not using antibiotics was anathema. Farmers terrified them, as it does often young parents. And we literally couldn't find a single organic farm around until Peter Flint came along about 8 years later and started the Organic Cow. And Peter then and Bunny started exciting some other farmers in the area. And so we went through we actually went the wrong way at the very beginning. In 1984, end of 1984, when we had to expand, we started buying in non-organic milk. Now it was hormone-free, antibiotic-free. It was, and so we weren't certified organic at this point. It was also, we were trying to convince these farmers to get away from pesticides, herbicides, chemical fertilizers. But in order to stay alive, we had to take a kind of a hiatus. And it took us until, I'm not even remembering the date, but I would say it was about 8 years, like I said, until we were able to ultimately get to the scale where, first of all, we were financially viable. During that period, as you heard in the podcast, we burned a lot of cash, making a lot of mistakes. Part of the problem was we were selling 69-cent cups of yogurt in a market that was $3 for $1 yogurts. I mean, it was superior. It was a better quality yogurt. or $1.69 quarts in a world that was 99-cent quarts. So we were also making tons of mistakes, getting tons of learnings, and frankly, creating a yogurt that had no preservatives, no fillers, no thickeners, getting it to shelf, getting it to stay on the shelf, getting it through a, let's call it a variable cold supply chain was, that summarizes millions of dollars of losses that we incurred in this time. So thanks to heroic folks like Peter and Bunny and others, we were able to finally start to buy organic milk in the early 90s and began slowly converting everything. By that time, the company was up to, I'm going to say, around $10 million in sales. And by the time we were 15 million in sales, we were able to start really converting. And by the time we were at, I'm going to say 21 million in sales, which is roughly 1994 or so, we were back to 100% organic. Mm-hmm. The dates, I may be a little off there, but...
so you were able to return to 100% organic, which is where you always wanted to be.
Yeah.
So this is very interesting. One of the things that interesting guy, David Weinstein, said to me this week is, he said, I saw a bumper sticker at EcoFarm, and it was like, support your local organic farmer. And he said, I just hate that bumper sticker because it's not enough. A farmer never exists in a vacuum. Mm. You can't just support the farmer. You need to support the store, the outlet, the distributor, the ecosystem that we live in. And so we need to build a whole organic ecosystem for this to succeed in the way that we imagine.
Well, I think a big part of the organic movement has been rebuilding a food system that was lost. I began my story by telling you in southern New Hampshire, we knew the farms, we knew the names of the sheep we were, eating, the lamb we were eating. That's all gone. I mean, that means that in those days, the veterinarians, the tractor suppliers, the feed folks, they were all there. And the early days of NOFA was a recognition that not only had we lost a lot of the, I don't want to call it ancient wisdom, but the traditional wisdom of farming more tuned into nature, less with fewer of the shortcuts. But we had lost the ability to, I mentioned, to bring cold products from a farm to the market. We had lost the ability. I mean, veterinarians didn't know how to take care of animals without using antibiotics and drugs. And of course, nowadays, the vets are, they're like the Maytag salespeople when it comes to organics. There's nothing to do because the animals are so healthy. But there were very few vets who were courageous enough to help us farmers to make that leap. So it was absolutely, at a very basic level, a statement that we need to rebuild a food system from scratch with an entirely different set of mores, like I say, with a conscious commitment to reducing and being responsible for externalities. That's not the way we had evolved in the prior century.
Yeah, and also you and Samuel are a good example of the fact that you were both first-generation farmers.
Yeah, well, Samuel was the farmer. I don't want to take credit where it isn't due. He was the farmer. I was the business fix-it guy. I was the educator, the marketer, the money guy. But yeah, we were. And so too, I mentioned to you all the dairy farmers who would not even consider the things we were talking about. We sat hat in hand at their kitchen tables, many of them after milking, and said, look, this is what we'd like you to do. And they were looking at us like we were crazy. I mean, it wasn't just they weren't interested. They thought this was nuts. The reason I invoked Peter and Bunny Flint is because in the end, the farmers did not want to talk to us, the business people, even though Samuel was they wanted to talk and hear from other farmers. And over the years, as we're now up to supporting 2,000 organic dairies, right? Family farms, average herd size, 66 cows. The primary way that farmers have come on board has been because other farmers have encouraged them. But the other, and you really raise a good point here, the other reason that we've been so successful in building to the scale we are now, which is more like 400 million in annual sales, is because the whole infrastructure is now back in place. We have the vets, we have the suppliers, we have, now in those days, we could find one veterinarian for all of New England who would travel to a farm that wasn't using antibiotics or hormones. Now you've got a lot more around there. The science is out there. It's been published. It's been reviewed. There's a track record. We now know that organically raised cows live twice as long as conventional cows. That was something we knew, Samuel knew, especially cows treated homeopathically, but we couldn't convince others to do that.
Okay, so the art of the possible is a big part of this, being able to see it.
Yeah.
Somebody can go and see it. I will disagree with one thing you said. You sort of said, well, I was not the farmer. I was the business guy. And farms simply don't survive without that knowledge too.
Yeah.
Whether it's a separate person.
Yeah. No, and I was milking and yes, but yeah.
Yeah,
but
and this is the challenge that farmers face if they're going to consider
when we
being their own processor.
Yeah, and forgive me for interrupting, but when we come around to the situation with the Horizon situation now, I couldn't agree with you more. You will see that the new partnership that I know we'll speak about shortly is including the entire ecosystem.
Yeah,
it's farmers, it's processors, it's brands, it's government, it's activists and stakeholders, and most importantly, it's consumers. Yeah. One of the things that Samuel and I, one of the underlying kind of credos that we had is that we wanted consumers to understand that food wasn't produced in the back of the supermarket. Now, we can say that in 2022, and maybe people will think it's ridiculous. It wasn't ridiculous in 1983. We had evolved through the era of Fluffernutter and Oreos to believe that food was something made somewhere, and the farmer wasn't even part of the equation. In fact, farming was thought to be dirty, and so, Samuel's late night travels all over the Northeast lecturing to classrooms and anybody who would listen, and my advocacy work at New Alchemy was to say, hey, no farms, no food, and organic is more likely way for these farmers to survive than conventional systems. It's anti-inflationary, you have less purchased inputs. Yes, it's more labor intensive, but you get a better price, and over time you get higher yield. We knew this in the science. We knew this from New Alchemy research, peer review funded research. We knew this from Samuel's farm. But the objective here, we can't take for granted today how far removed we all were back then. And even we in the organic movement need to constantly remember, and this gets back to my point about why I'm not in entire agreement with the objectives of or the methods, I should say, of the Real Organic Project, is that there's we're a rounding error in terms of total food system, right? And so efforts that well-intentioned efforts that tend to divide us among ourselves when really the real enemy is the folks who are not measuring and reducing externalities, right? And we just need to keep that in mind.
Sure.
It's important to say that I think for organic to devolve into just a debate about standards, and I, again, fully agree that the standards are in need of constant, particularly right now, improvement. But there will always be a need of improvement. But we can't lose sight of the fact that this is much more than about food. This is how we think, right? Organic is about recognizing that the Earth is not our subsidiary. We are a subsidiary of planet Earth. Every human endeavor, every economic entity out there has been made possible by a bountiful Earth. But somehow, in the myths that underlaid 20th century, the Industrial Revolution, we somehow came to believe that the Earth is our subsidiary. It's there for the taking and the dumping. That's one of the big myths. And organic is intended to help us right our place, put ourselves as partners with nature, not as dominant over. And yes, we need better standards, and yes, we need there, and we need metrics, and we need to have, as Bob Rodale was suggesting with the regenerative notion, we need to have win-win-win-win-win food systems where there are no losers, where the air, water, and soil, the living organisms in the soil and the air and the water, the humans, the farmers, the processors, the consumers, all can win. And I'm satisfied in my own mind that, and again, nowadays I'm an investor in probably 40 organic companies. I really don't want to know how many. I don't want my wife to know how many, more importantly. But, I'm satisfied that organic is absolutely capable of generating win-win-win-win economics. But that's a different way of thinking. Most of capitalism is about somebody winning at somebody else's expense. And that's how we got into this mess with climate and toxins and food deserts and everything else.
Did you ever read Peter Thiel's book? I think it's called 0 to 1. And
I never have read it.
It was based on a symposium he did at Stanford. Very interesting idea of capitalism. And in his idea, real capitalism, there actually are no losers because you're never competing with anybody. You're always innovating, creating something new.
Yeah.
And so you're not fighting over, well, like I can pay my labor less than you pay your labor because you're doing something totally different. I thought it was a very interesting way of looking at the challenges that we face.
The lens that I have evolved to look through is the lens of consumer products, because I started from the premise that the most powerful thing that average consumers who may not be engaged in food production at all can do is to use conscious consumption to shift dollars towards more sustainable things than away. But that means that you first have to be aware of and that's why we need standards, right? There has to be a there. This is the problem with this word regenerative, is there's no there. And you have now Pepsi having ads of Lay's potato chips the potatoes have been grown regeneratively, whatever the hell that means. It means whatever they want it to mean. And it's a real threat to organic because they're trying to sound green and they're pouring millions into it. But through my lens, which is, in other words, Samuel and I, from the beginning, always viewed the supermarket as a classroom. That was our kind of moniker. It was a place to sell stuff, but also to educate, to share values. That's why the back of our yogurt cups went into how it's grown and how you can find, and this is before social media, so we didn't have, people couldn't go to our website. So we would send out moose letters, all the moose that's fit to print, and we would have thousands of these go out by mail. Remember mail? You would put it in the envelope. But if you get at a very base level at what's gone on with consumer products up until the organic era, I'll call it, is that the mission of consumer products was always to charge as much as you could for your product, and then make your product as cheap as you possibly could, so you have as big a gross margin as possible. Because then with the big gross margin, in other words, the margin that's left after the cost of goods, you could then buy advertising. And you could use advertising the same way we use it in politics, with reach and frequency to pummel people with messages, right? But that whole formula was based on cheaper product at the highest price. That's the opposite of the way we think in organic. We're not all about the cheapest product. We readily admit it costs. There's no free lunch. You got to pay farmers properly. It takes 3 years to convert. There's a lot of labor that goes in. If an animal becomes ill, you don't treat it with cheap antibiotics. You take it out of the herd. That's an expense to the farmer. And you go through this whole labyrinth of costs, right? That I can use the simple aphorism, internalizing the externalities. But what it means in real life is that you're taking on a lot of costs and a lot of risks. And of course you need the higher price. It's more expensive. But the bet that you're making is that over time, you'll have the higher yields that will, offset that. But getting back to my point about consumer products, what we set out to do, and most people don't talk about organics this way, but this is the way I look at it. We set out to say, hey, we're not going to focus on cheapening we're going to focus on paying the right price, making sure farmers are paid properly. So today, right now, 2022, organic dairy farmers in New England get a revenue that's 225% of what they would get if they were conventional. They get, over $30 a hundredweight, and conventional farmers are getting around 12. So if you buy Chobani, you're buying into a system that underpays the farmers. In fact, mostly below their costs. If you buy Organic Valley or Stonyfield or, even Horizon, which we'll talk about, you're at least paying the farmers a livable wage, if not a fighting chance for economic survival. So our thing was, well, okay, we're going to pay the proper cost for our supplies, and then we're going to have a smaller gross margin. And so we don't have the room to pay for advertising. So we don't have that tool that's available to most consumer products. So we're competing with Dannon and Yoplait and Breyers and all the others with one hand behind our back because we don't have this kind of advertising budget. So what we set out to do was to tell our story, to actually, open the kimono and share what was going on. And that's how we built Stonyfield, one cup at a time. The newsletters, the lids, putting cows up for adoption. You could get 5 cows. If you sent us 5 lids, you would adopt a cow. You would get a certificate of your cow. You would get a photograph of your cow, and twice a year, in those days, the cow would send you letters, talking about what was going on the farm. And it was a slow build because we didn't have the power of television advertising or, let alone Super Bowl ads to, get wide swaths of consumers. And so when, Jack Demoulas, the buyer at Demoulas, says, look, I'll take you in, but what are you going to do for advertising? That's when we launched our Have a Cow program. We started having an engagement with consumers, and we built thousands and thousands through these newsletters. In the end, we won. Stonyfield is, one of the top 4 brands across the, in the marketplace, and we're no different. Organic Valley, as I've mentioned, but Nature's Path. So many of these established brands got there without advertising, got there by sharing our story, building the ultimate holy grail of consumer products, which is loyalty. Because in the end, the power of loyalty is you get word of mouth. If you're loyal to a product, you're going to tell your wife or somebody buy this product. You get passion, you get emotion. Most of us don't become loyal intellectually, we feel it. And so nowadays with bloggers and social media and so forth, we're able to really be transparent. You can visit one of our our farms on camera now 24/7, and you can feel connected to them. And so that's the central paradigm of organic, is changing the way we think about even economics, paying the proper price of cost of goods, doing with less advertising, because we're going to build loyalty by being real, by having an authentic purpose. And that's, of course, what you're getting at with the Real Organic Project, is let's make it real.
Let's go back to dairy.
Yeah.
And, when we were talking about dairy, you really gave a great description of what organic dairy is about and the benefits for all of us, whether we buy that organic milk or not. Everybody wins.
Right.
It's why the government in Denmark has put such support into organic farming, because they realize it's good for all citizens, not just the ones who choose to buy organic in the store.
Right.
So it sounds wonderful. I think I got the idea that organic farmers are making more than conventional farmers.
Yeah, and that's scientific. Washington State University has, documented evidence that organic farms make between 22 and 35% more net income.
So here we are. Are there problems? Because I see problems. Are there problems with organic dairy right now? We know, we'll talk about what's happened with Danone, but even before Danone made their announcement, farmers have been going out of business rapidly. So clearly, even though they might be making more money, it's still not working for many of them.
Yeah.
And people say, well, it's the nut milks. And I go, no. I don't think so.
In the big picture of dairy right now, we have an absolute catastrophe unfolding with conventional. The pay price now going on 7 or 8 years has been on average below the costs of production, certainly for farmers in the Northeast, family farmers. even if they're 300, 400, 500 cow farms. On the conventional side, on average, the only way you're making it is if you're not accounting for depreciation. And you can see it. You can drive around and see conventional farms with their silos leaning and the fences run down and the barns unpainted because they can't afford the maintenance money. You go across the border into Quebec and instantly you see these tidy farms because conventional farmers are paid the proper price. In fact, conventional farmers in Quebec are paid, I don't have the latest prices, but compared to St. Albans conventional farmers over here, they're paid something like 30% more for conventional, not even for organic. So in addition, the other part of the catastrophe for conventional farmers is that all of their input costs have gone up, especially during COVID. We all see supply chain problems. So you have rising costs and price below, and the prices are oscillating, and you have no control over those prices. Now, this was not news. This is something Samuel and the Flints and others of us set out to fix 30 years ago when we fixed an Organic Valley and credit where it's due, Horizon's founders, and set to a fundamental kind of commitment of organic dairy was that we were going to pay a floor price that would not go down. That was not tied to component costs. It was tied to what's a fair price for the farms. Now, that price has been under pressure because the other big problem in dairy, before I come around to organic, is that overall dairy consumption is dropping. And so it's not due to plant-based alternatives. That is a factor. I think the latest estimate is that plant-based alternatives are making around a 6% dent across all dairy categories. A little bit more in fluid milk, a little bit less in yogurt, a lot less in cheese. It's because we have an aging population who are consuming less dairy per capita. It's because there are health reasons that people have moved away. We understand dairy allergies better. Fundamentally, we probably over-index in the U.S. for dairy consumption. It's really basically baby food, and although it's an excellent source of nutrition, calcium and protein and so on and so forth, all of us are rethinking how much dairy we consume, and that's had a net effect of depressing the overall market. Then you have another factor that you cannot dissociate from all this, which is a marketplace factor, which is that you've had a flood of new products in the marketplace out there. And during COVID, when groceries and others have been challenged with traffic, you have companies absolutely throwing products at retailers. And retailers are not stupid. They're taking the promotional allowances and so on and so forth. And it's depressed the price. And it's made it a highly competitive. And if you're not in it, most dairies, I would say, are holding steady or losing money at this point right now. And so they're not about to raise their price to farmers. So you take all these conditions and it's bad. And that's why we have this long waiting list of conventional farmers looking to convert. And basically all of our organic farmers were once conventional, and they all left because they saw no future, certainly for their children.
They left conventional.
Left conventional.
Yeah.
Now, within organic, and I'll just maybe focus on New England because this is where I am, and I think, and you are, and it's the region I know best. So even within organic, we've had a challenging time. So in 2020, organic fluid, in contrast to conventional, organic fluid, which shrunk in 2020, and we don't have 21 numbers yet, that's why I'm giving you 2020, organic actually grew by 12% in the marketplace. So we Stonyfield, were actually able to add on a few new farms in the last couple of years. But nowhere near comparison to the waiting list of farmers who want to convert.
Excuse me, it grew 12% by volume or by sales?
By dollars.
By dollars.
By dollars, yeah.
So some of that might have been a price increase?
Yeah, but in COVID there weren't much there weren't price increases. It was, it was largely consumption. Interestingly, digital online sales grew. So cheese, things that you can ship grew a lot. Local grew a lot. You'll see, talk to Shelburne Farms, talk to folks who had on-farm sales. They really spiked. People were staying local and they wanted more. And I'm pretty sure the numbers in 2021 will show the same thing, a small, an increase. But that's again in comparison to a complete decrease, a collapse in conventional, which dropped even further.
Thank you for listening to the Real Organic Podcast. We hope that you will subscribe, tell your friends, and leave us a rating and review so that others can find us. A video version of this interview is found at realorganicproject.org/episode 91. In this second half, Gary will be talking more about the Northeast Organic Family Farm Partnership that was formed in response to the Horizon Dairy contract cancellations last summer. To support this podcast and our certified farms, become a recurring donor at realorganicproject.org and you'll get the benefits of being a real friend, including our book club, where you can ask many of our favorite authors your questions. Our next book club guest is Mark Schatzker, author of The Dorito Effect, The Surprising New Truth About Food and Flavor. We'll see you there.